former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And Mike, I want to go to this in the Defense Intelligence Agency report on worldwide threats. They focus in on Al-Qaeda, and they say in the one sentence on page 29 of 34 of the report, overall, Amir Iman al-Zawahiri remains in hiding while a handful of Iran-based Al-Qaeda leaders oversee Al-Qaeda's network. We have focused in, Mike, on the specifics there, that it's not talking about a handful of just random Al-Qaeda people, but Al-Qaeda leadership running Al-Qaeda with the protection of Iran, with the capabilities that they would have inside of Iran. And as you pointed out, that's very different than capabilities inside a hiding out in a cave in a mountain.
So for quite a while, the United States has known that the senior operational leadership was in the hands of leaders that had fled Afghanistan. Frankly, the AFPAC border, because of work that the United States did, we pushed them off the X, and they found safe haven in Iran. And while this has been going back and forth for a while, the Iranians have now moved to a place where they are permitted to be the operational leaders. The nominal leader of Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, still remains technically in charge. But make no mistake about it, today the Iranian regime harbors the Al-Qaeda senior leaders that are responsible for the global jihad, the global operations of Al-Qaeda.
You know, this is Jay, Mike, and one of the things that's interesting here is that, and we've seen this before, I've often said, and we did a documentary on it a number of years ago, that Iran is the greatest exporter of state-sponsored terrorism in the world. Now they have an operating entity, Al-Qaeda, operating under their protection. By the way, the BBC said you said this and you had no evidence of it. Of course, now they're having to retract all that evidently. But does this escalate the terror capabilities that Iran has? Because, as you just said, if they're under Iranian protection, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has a huge influence.
So, look, the Iranians were prepared to host them because it provided assurances for the Iranians. The Iranians could, in fact, say, if you operate from here, you can't allow attacks inside of Iran. You know, people have been confused because Al-Qaeda, obviously a Sunni enterprise, the Iranians a Shia terror organization. But this is really straightforward. When the little Satan of Israel, the great Satan of the United States is the threat, they are prepared to work together, to coordinate, to do all of the things that they can do to spread their terror. And your point is well taken. This is operating inside a very powerful nation, a country that is different from some place where you're out in the middle of nowhere doing your best to extract resources from the land. They're operating in a major urban area, a major protected environment, and with the capacity for the Iranian regime to provide them the infrastructure and support they need to spread their terror around the world.
You know, I want to go back to the fact that the world doesn't seem, Mike, to want to acknowledge this. It's like it's in our own government too. So their own intel, it's not you saying it, it's not the Trump administration intel, their own intel and Defense Intelligence Agency is telling everybody negotiating with Iran right now in the Biden administration, they're providing a safe haven and a much more sophisticated safe haven to Al-Qaeda's leaders, giving them a chance to rebuild, a new way to utilize technology and recruit, unfortunately, and to spread their terrorism, to kind of reboot a new kind of Al-Qaeda, if you will, in a much better place, protected by the Revolutionary Guard. And yet, I feel like they're going to ignore this entirely and go moving full steam ahead with any kind of negotiations. I mean, there was talk about $7 billion for a prisoner swap. That was on the table. The U.S. denying it, Iran saying no, it was confirmed. But, I mean, this seems to be a pattern that we're re-entering that we saw in the Obama years, but it's on like a fast-forward track in the Biden years.
It's the darndest thing, Jordan. So you have this knowledge. You have the Biden Defense Intelligence Agency talking about this terror, this Al-Qaeda terror leadership inside of Tehran. And you have the administration saying that they are prepared to lift terror sanctions on the Iranians in exchange for a deal that has already largely been shown to be ineffectual. It is almost unexplainable to think about how someone could see that making sense, how an average American could stare at the terrorists from the Iranian regime, knowing that they're harboring Al-Qaeda's most senior terror operators, and say, oh, goodness, the United States decision today is to lift terror sanctions on these folks. It's befuddling, to say the least.
I was going to ask our policy director, Harry Hutchinson, who's here with me right now. You know, it seems, following up what the Secretary just said, it seems that the lack of policy here is dramatic from the Biden administration.
Absolutely. And my intuition is that the Biden administration simply does not wish to put American interests first. They don't really care about average working men and women in the United States. They want to put forward the ideas that come from global elites, from high-tech companies, and basically, as Secretary Pompeo notes, they want to re-enter a deal with Iran, despite the fact that Iran has never fully complied with the prior deal. And so it makes no sense to hand more money to a terrorist organization.
And Mike, following that up, and you got Zarif last week saying that, hey, he's just a diplomat, and the diplomatic corps, we don't have the influence because the Revolutionary Guard really has the influence here, so we're just kind of, functionaries. So why would you sit down and negotiate with these people?
We always said we're happy to talk with whoever the Iranians put forward, but they have to be someone with the capacity to actually be a decision maker, someone who can speak on behalf of the only person that really matters in the regime, and that is the Ayatollah. And what you can see from the release of the tapes, even the foreign minister himself acknowledges he's a bit player, he's a fancy suit, he's an English-speaking shill for the terror regime. And to sit down with his team, the foreign ministry team that works for Javad Zarif, will likely lead you to talking to someone who's going to have to go back and check with HQ. And if HQ doesn't like what they see, they're going to reject the deal. It is odd to set up a conversation with people who actually can't represent the country or the regime that they purport to represent.
It seems like Secretary Pompeo, they are having some difficulty in with the leak of the audio of Zarif, and then you've got elections coming up there in June, that maybe this isn't happening as fast for the Biden administration. It's just not looking as good on paper. There's more reporters on this. But do you see this administration in any sense, or is it like the Obama administration, deal, we don't really care about anything else, we just want to say we got a deal? Or do you think there is a chance that if we keep this pressure up and this news that keeps coming out and this intel reports that come out from their own intelligence, from the U.S. intelligence, that there is a way to prevent the Biden administration from getting into this deal again with the devil?
Jordan, they're pretty wedded to it, and they seem moving that way headlong. But it's important that ordinary Americans, working class people all across the country, understand the risk that they're putting the United States in. They need to understand, for those of us who understand the central nature of our relationship with Israel and to protect the Jewish homeland, they need to understand the risk that's there. So it is vital that we talk about this in a way that the American people can understand, and so they will urge their representatives, Republican or Democrat, to urge the administration not to once again go down a path which creates a simple way for the Iranians to ultimately end up with not only a nuclear weapon, but a broader nuclear program as well.